Hello, everyone. This is the Free American Press with your host, Alexander Horat. Before we begin, if you could please subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video, that would be great. And today we are having Tennessee State Representative from the 2nd District, Bud Hulsey, on the show. Hello, Bud. Thank you for coming on the show.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Alexander. Glad to be here.
That's great. So, can you tell the audience a little bit about your background, what made you want to become a state representative?
Well, I was born in Arizona and raised in southwestern Colorado outside Durango. And then I went to college at Bob Jones University in Greenville, South Carolina. And I moved up here from there. And I went into a career of law enforcement. I worked for a police department here for 36 years. And I was a watch commander the last 25 of those years. Went to FBI National Academy and that's my career background. And when I retired, I I had wrestled around. It is my conviction, Alexander, that if we're going to salvage this republic, it's not going to happen from the federal government. I don't have any confidence in the federal government at all to preserve liberty and sovereignty of people in this country. So to me, the salvation of this republic will come from states, and states have to exercise constitutional sovereignty. I think if we're gonna save this republic, so when you look around at all the things that are looming and coming in very very quickly at 360 degrees against this nation, the globalist approach to it, to own your property, to make a slave out of you, and take away your sovereignty and liberty. It's coming in. The globalist positions and efforts are coming in 360 degrees. So I thought, instead of griping about it all the time, maybe I'll just run for office and try to do what I can do to put the state of Tennessee, do my part to try and preserve liberty. So that's kind of what my focus was, and that's how I got involved in it. And I've been there fixing to start my 12th year now.
Yeah, well, that's definitely great. I have a good friend, Patrick from Missouri, and he says federal politics are basically over. You can't really make a change as a citizen. So I think that's great that you're focusing on states' rights and on your state, Tennessee, because the federal government, I think, is beyond fixing right now. We need to first get the states in order fixed before we can fix the federal government, I think. So that leads me to my next question. So, what are some of the major bills that you have sponsored in the past as a legislator?
Well, tried to focus on what I told you. I can remember when COVID happened. I never had dreamed actually that the vehicle for tyranny in the United States would be the medical community. But that's what it turned out to be. And I got crossways with the executive branch of government here in Tennessee by when they like other states came out and said these businesses can close and these businesses can open, and you can't meet at church or no more than 12 people. It was in Tennessee, and limit your travel, limit your ability to move around, limit your freedom. Of course, the Constitution doesn't say that it is the supreme law of the land until you have a virus. It doesn't say that. So, right out of the gate, you had Biden, who came out with an executive order, which, by the way, while we're talking about it, I hate executive orders because they have a propensity to turn into law from the executive branch. So people don't understand executive orders they're only supposed to apply to the executive branch of government. They don't apply to people. If they apply to people, then it's law. And the executive branch of government doesn't have the constitutional authority to make law. That's the legislative branch. But when Biden came out with his executive order that said that all employers in the state of Tennessee will force their employees to take a shot whether they want it or not. I ran a bill that said, no, I can't control what a company does, a private company does. But what I did is I ran a bill that said state government and local government, municipal government, cannot force employees to take a shot they don't want and make it a condition of their employment. And had to fight that pretty big in the health subcommittee and the health full committee, and these are Republican controlled committees. and I had to fight pretty hard to get that bill passed, but it did pass, and what it did was it kept firemen and policemen and any state employee, school teachers, any government employee, municipal or otherwise, from being forced to take the shot they don't want. And people call me a conspiratorialist, and I would say the good thing about being a conspiratorialist is I don't have myocarditis, so that is a good thing. So that bill passed. There's another bill that I've run for 3 years, and I'm going to run it again this year, on nullification. And boy, that is a real hot topic when you look at the states. If states are going to be the salvation of this republic, if it's going to be salvaged, then states have to step up and take their constitutional authority to do it. And most people don't understand that the Constitution was not written to bestow rights. Now, people look at me crossways when I say that, but the Constitution does not bestow rights. According to the Declaration, it says all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. So rights from the very beginning never came from government. They never came from a constitution. They come from God, God Almighty. That's where rights are derived. The purpose of the Constitution is to secure those rights, and that's what the next line in the Declaration says. That's why governments are instituted to secure them. So if you understand that, then you see that government can only do two things with your rights. They can secure them or they can take them away. But they can't bestow them, because God is who bestows rights. So you have to ask, why was the Constitution written? Well, it was written as to be big chains and binders to bind down this newly created, they didn't call it a federal government, they called it a central government. They were worried when the states enacted or created the central government. They wanted a very limited central government. In fact, if you read Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, it says what the federal government can do and where their little garden is. And that's kind of what the states did. They said, you got this little garden we're going to make for you, and we're going to tell you what you can do, the things that you have sovereignty over. But this big, huge garden out here that's left over belongs to the states. And you find that in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. And there's only 18 things, Alexander. There's only about 18 things that the federal government has a constitutional authority to have a sovereignty in. Everything else absolutely belongs to the power of the people in the states. And we've seen over the past 150 years, the federal government has done what governments do. It has slowly and methodically encroached on what the state's business is and started hoeing in the state's garden. And their garden has grown and grown and grown, and the state's garden has shrunk. And people now have the misplaced idea that the federal government is sovereign and the states are not, and nothing could be further from the truth. And it's like the founders still worried about it even after the Constitution was ratified. They still worried about it because 2 years later they came out with the Bill of Rights. And it was like, if you read the preamble to the Bill of Rights, it's like they said, okay, in case you didn't understand it, here's 10 things that you don't mess around in at all. That's why the very first amendment to the Bill of Rights says Congress shall make no law, none, zero, zilch, You will make no law when it comes to the religion or the establishment of religion or the free exercise thereof or the right to free speech or the right to assemble. No law. Second Amendment. People think that I was in law enforcement for 36 years and people have this idea that police protect you. Well, police can't protect you. There's not enough of them. They don't have the ability to protect you. And if they're supposed to, we need to fire all of them because they did a miserable job last year. If you look at how many rapes and murders and thefts and burglaries and car thefts and aggravated assaults and everything else that happened in this country, if it's the police's job to protect you from that, they did a miserable job. But it's not their job to protect you. They can't do that. Their job is to keep the peace, but that's a whole nother topic. But anyway, that's why the Second Amendment is in there. I remember one time I stopped this lady. She was about 80 years old. And I walked up to the car and she said, "I'm supposed to tell you that I'm packing." And I said, excuse me, I said, "That's interesting." And I said, "Well, what are you packing?" She said, "Well, I like a 38 off a well." She said, "I have one of them in my glove box." And she said, "But now I like a 9mm too." And she said, "I have one of those in the console." And I said, "No kidding, anything else?" And she said, "Well, what I really like is what you boys carry, a Glock 45. And I said, "Good night, lady. What in the world are you afraid of?" She said, "Not a darn thing." That is the whole intent of the Second Amendment is police can't protect you. You have a duty to protect yourself. So if you look at these 10 added amendments that came in 2 years later after the Constitution was ratified, it was like the states were saying, just in case you don't understand it, here's 10 things you don't mess around in at all. And one of those, by the way, is the Ninth Amendment, which most law schools don't teach anything about the Ninth Amendment. But the Ninth Amendment says what rights God gave prior to the ratification of the Constitution of the United States, the people have a right to retain, even though they very well may not be enumerated in the Constitution. So I think states have missed an opportunity to argue, for example, on abortion. Under the Ninth Amendment, common law that was in existence before the Constitution was ratified, under common law, it was a crime to kill your unborn child because they had a right by God's law to live. And it was the same for, that's what I tried to add an amendment down here on this bill that doctors can't cut off viable body parts of kids to try to make them into another gender. I tried to add an amendment that said under common law in the Ninth Amendment, a child has a right not to be harmed. And that is true, and that comes from the Ninth Amendment. But most people have a misplaced idea that the federal government is supreme. Well, it's not. It's not. The Constitution says, it's another one of these chains and binders that bind down this central government, that no, you have about 18 things you can mess around in. Everything else is left up to the power of the people in the states, and that's what the 10th Amendment says. What's been enumerated to the central government or the federal government, you can do these 18 things, but everything else is ours. And that's where the 10th Amendment to the Constitution comes in. So our sovereignty for a state is bigger than the sovereignty of the federal government. The people have never been taught that. For years, they have never been taught that. And their idea is the Supreme Court's supreme, and that the federal government is supreme, and that the state has to do what they say. Well, I ran this bill for 3 years on nullification. It doesn't force our legislature to nullify anything. And nullification is not rebellion, and it's not secession. Nullification just simply says, no, what you're saying is unconstitutional, and we're not going to do it in this state, and we're not going to spend money to have it done in this state. And the bill doesn't force the legislature to nullify anything. What it does say is that if you're going to nullify something in Tennessee, there's 5 ways to do it. And one of them, of course, is for the legislature to run a bill to say we're not doing that in this state. There's another way that actually puts the people right up next to the legislature. And if you have 2,000 people who sign a petition and they're registered voters, you verify that, and they send a petition to the Speaker of the House saying, we would like you to run a bill of nullification on this particular issue, whatever it is that the federal government's done that's unconstitutional, then the legislature has to run a bill. They don't have to pass it, but they have to vote on it. They have to run a bill and they have to vote on it. And another way is if the executive branch, the head of the executive branch, the governor, if the federal government imposes something on the executive branch of state government in Tennessee and it is blatantly unconstitutional, the governor has a right to nullify it on its face and say, no, we're not doing that here. It's unconstitutional. We're not doing that. And another way is if you have 10 city boards of mayor and alderman or 10 county commissions and 10 of them get together and sign the same kind of petition, ask for a bill of nullification for a particular issue, then the legislature has to run that bill and it can't be killed in committee. It has to go to the House floor and the Senate floor for a vote. Now, they don't have to pass it, but they got to vote one way or the other. And that's an attempt to, boy, I'm telling you, of course, lawyers have blasted me and said, I don't understand. And you go read the old boys, they'll say that nullification was wrong on its face and you can't do it. And it's proven by Calhoun in South Carolina years ago that tried to nullify. But in that case, Calhoun was wrong because there was an issue over tariffs. And tariffs is one of the 18 things that the federal government does have sovereignty over. And so Calhoun was wrong trying to nullify that. But excuse me, you look at the Sedition Act and what Thomas Jefferson and Madison did when Congress passed this law that said you can't speak against Congress, you can't say anything bad about them or the President of the United States. And Jefferson said, he wrote a resolution for the state of Kentucky and said, no, this is not a constitutional law. This is not constitutionally sound. And because it is unconstitutional, we will nullify it. And we will treat it as if it is not law at all. And Madison did the same thing for Virginia. But those boys' position, if you go read what they said, they believed that a state could not be forced at all to do something that was unconstitutional if the federal government tried to make them do it. And to me, that's the only answer to trying to begin to dig out of this pit if we're going to salvage this republic. It's going to have to be from states.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I think it's up to the states. And I do think states need to nullify bad federal government laws that are unconstitutional and infringe on our basic human rights. So, I was wanting to ask you about the lab-grown meat and the geoengineering bills that you got passed. If you'd like to tell the audience a little bit about those bills.
As I recall, and this clutters up in my brain, you have to forgive me out there, because I can't hold in my head what I used to. But the lab-grown meat bill, what we ended up settling on, if I believe I'm correct, was that we didn't ban, you couldn't sell it, if I recall correctly, because it really wasn't my bill. I just co-sponsored that bill, but it didn't say that you can't market it. It says it has to be labeled exactly what it is, that it is lab-grown meat, that it is not real meat. And I think that's what finally came out of the final draft, but I'd have to check. The geoengineering bill, I started off at that, and I gave that to Monty Fritz, and he actually worked, and I co-sponsored it too, to make it illegal for the stinking federal government or whoever's doing it, what arm of the federal government's doing this spraying chemicals to under the guise of stopping global warming. Of course, without any Americans' consent, without any state's consent, just doing it. And that's a big issue. We passed the bill, actually, first state in the country to do it, to make it illegal. But the problem is, it is very hard to find out and get tangible physical evidence while it's going on and who's responsible for it. We've tried to work with getting an enforcement arm, to have a pretty healthy enforcement of it and penalty for violating it. But that is proven to be harder than you think. They got these apps where you can look at a plane that's coming across right over the top of you, and you can look on your phone if you got this app, and it'll tell you the tail numbers of that airplane, where it's originated from, where it's going to. Well, they blacked that out of these aircraft spraying these chemicals, and it's very hard to find out where they come from, who's flying them, and what the substance is. Now, I've heard that they actually have flown a chase plane up behind one of them and took samples of what they're spewing out. But I haven't read a whole detailed report about it. But that's what I've heard. But that is proven. Even though we passed the bill, it is proven very hard to really nail down who's flying the plane, who owns the plane, what they're hauling, where they originate out, where they reload. It's very difficult to find that out.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for giving the viewers some information on that. So, we were talking on the phone earlier about property easements and how you fought against that. I was wondering if you could tell the viewers a little bit about that battle that you had.
Yeah, people that know anything about conservation easements, I believe in the goal. The goal was we need to preserve as much farmland as we can preserve so we can feed people. I agree with that. Tennessee's had a lot of growth of people moving in this state, and most of them move here to flee tyranny from their own state. And I like them people. I mean, I'm glad they're coming here as long as they're coming as immigrants from a tyrannical state. I don't want them coming as missionaries. I mean, I hate to say this, Alexander, but a lot of missionaries out of California went to Colorado and they ruined it.
Yeah.
But if they come here as immigrants to flee tyranny from the states they came from, then I like them here. We've had a whole lot of growth in this state of people moving in here, and so I'm in favor of the goal of preserving farmland for sure. But a conservation easement, most people don't understand that when you make this agreement, it binds you. The easement holder can control your property. It does control your property. You own it, but you don't control it. In other words, if you buy into the program and you sign this agreement and you're growing cabbages and corn right now, and 10 years from now the market falls out of cabbages and you want to grow soybeans, you can't do that. If you wanted to start growing beef because there's a shortage of beef, you can't do that. You can't even build a fence where you don't have an existing fence now. You can't build a barn in some other place, a different location. And what happens is down the road, there's no way for a farmer to financially be able to make profit by changing with what the market demands and use his land the way he wants to. He owns it, but he does not control it. And the sad thing about it is, it's not for 10 years or 20 years. It's in perpetuity. It is permanent. Now, both the Bible and Exodus says don't ever put your land in perpetuity, but the Constitution of the state of Tennessee says perpetuities won't be allowed, and still did it. And I argued against it in committee, in the Agriculture Committee, and I added an amendment to say no, it can be no longer 15 years. And at the end of 15 years, if you want to do it again, you renew it again. If you don't have to. And I could not get that amendment passed. And that's the terrible thing about it to me, is it is forever. When you sign that agreement, it is forever. And I think your grandkids will curse you instead of bless you, because you set it up where they own the land, but they can't control it. And at the end of the day, what do? Well, you sell it to somebody else that really doesn't need it, or you sell it to a state entity who buys it up, and at the end of the day, you end up losing the property. So it was a very, very troubling thing to me. And but it passed here. That's one of the worst bills we've ever passed.
Yeah, that's definitely sick because eventually all the properties or a majority are going to have these conservation easements. I see it like if you want to buy a property that has a conservation easement, the property value is way less than with property you can actually have control over. So I think that's a huge issue. And I think you were right in fighting that, basically trying to stand up for people's rights to have their land free and clear. So I don't think the conservation easements are a good idea either. So that actually brings me To my next question. So we see that people in Tennessee do not truly own their property due to property taxes. I see many low-income people losing their property because of financial hardships. Would you consider sponsoring a bill to end property taxes for people's primary residence?
I don't want to tip my hand too much about it, but yeah, I'm running a bill this year dealing with that on property evaluations and property taxes and caps. Uh, Actually, it's a lot. I met with Dr. Laffer, who you recall from your state, wrote the bill on Proposition 13, which was one of the best things California ever did. And yeah, I got a bill in the hopper. It's not written yet, but I met with him in Nashville. He lives here now, and working on a bill to do that. But I can't tip my hat or tip my hand on all that's got in it because there's going to be a big fight over that too.
Wow, I think that's awesome. I think that's great that you're standing up for people's private property rights, because I'm tired of seeing, people with low income losing their houses due to property taxes, farmers losing their property due to property taxes, and everything like that. It's really hurting the most low income people in the states. So I think it's great that you're taking a stand on that. And could you tell us any other bills that you're going to be running for next year? Is there any other bills that you think you're going to be running?
Yeah, I'm going to run a bill to try to put some fences around the real ID system. Here's another one of those deals that the federal government has no business messing in. Article 1, Section 8 does not say anything about driver's licenses. The federal government has no business in the driver's license arena. That's left up to states. But now you end up with a real ID where the federal government's in the middle of driver's licenses. And it troubles me a great deal because of the database and the surveillance ability with the photos that you take for real ID and the database of all the information that you got, where it goes. I think it's another arm for a national ID, digital ID, and those things scare me. So I got a bill to try to rein in the particularly what happens to the data in a real ID system. And most people don't know this, but the way the federal law is written, the director or the secretary of Homeland Security has the right, anytime he wants to, without congressional approval, he can add other stipulations to the federal ID. In other words, right now, you talked to Mr. Griffin, didn't you?
Yes, I did talk to Mr. Griffin.
Yeah, he's a brilliant guy. Um, I went out and spoke along with a couple of three other people at a conference that he had in South Dakota a year ago, September, I think.
Oh, that's cool.
And we talked about the Universal Commercial Code, which all 50 states have the same Universal Commercial Code law. And these folks worked very hard for a long time to get all 50 states to have the same code written the same way. And it deals with stocks mostly. But most people have the idea that they own their own stock. And you used to. If you still got a certificate, a piece of paper that's got your name and a certificate number and how many shares you own, you're good to go. You better hang on to that.
Yeah.
But in 1994, they went digital. And now people think they own their own stock, but they really don't. When you go purchase stock, it gets forwarded up past your broker. Your contract's just between you and your broker, but it gets uplined way up to most of it, not all of it, but most of it goes into what's called a depository trust corporation. It's in New York, and it doesn't have your name on it. It's just dumped in there. Now, that's all well and good, except big banks, too big to fail banks like JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, these big boys. smaller banks and smaller entities are borrowing money from these big banks, and they're using your stock as collateral for the loan. It's not with your consent unless it's in all the myriad of paperwork that you sign and you don't even know it's in there. But what happens is if you have a default, a bankruptcy, then these big banks that loaned money using your stock as collateral, the way the UCC code's written, they have priority to get their money back first in a collapse. Now, that happened in 2008 with Lehman Brothers, but it wasn't a big, huge collapse in the whole scheme of events, but it was a collapse. And the people whose stock that they used, or blocks of stock that they used as collateral, there was a little bit of time before wasn't too long before the low, not so big borrowers got their stock back. But there were some people that took almost 15 years to get their money back in their property back off of the Lehman Brothers. Now, the banks will deny that, but that's exactly what happened. My fear is not that. My fear is based on David Webb's book. And boy, for your listeners, that's a great book for them to read. It's called The Great Taking. David Webb's a brilliant guy, lives in Switzerland or Sweden. When he came over and testified for this bill when I ran it last year or year before last. What I'm afraid of is what he's afraid of. And he's afraid that there's coming an orchestrated collapse. It will be done on purpose. And when that happens, everybody will lose their property.
Exactly. That's huge. People are going to lose their property because of property taxes because they're not going to be able to pay for it.
Yep. Well, what happens too is if it'd be a great time to introduce a central bank digital currency, and which of course the Fed wants it. And, that scares me probably more than anything. We've tried to address some bills down here that say that that's not recognized in this state, but people don't understand. I don't think they think, especially people under 35 or so who are used to, they grew up on computer stuff and digital stuff and they love it. They love the convenience of it, but I don't think they realize if you go to a central bank digital currency, what does that mean? It means they do away with cash. There are no $10 bills, $20 bills, $50 bills, or $100 bills. There is no more cash. Currency is just a number that's on your phone or your computer or a card in your wallet or a chip in your hand. It's just a number. But the problem with it is programmable. In other words, every individual account is programmable, which means if you don't behave, it'll be exactly what China does right now. If you don't behave, they can program your account to where, for example, if they say you're burning too much gasoline, we can see what you buy in gas, and you're burning too much gasoline, so we're going to limit your ability to purchase gasoline to 20 gallons a week. And your account will only allow $20 a week to purchase gasoline. If you really misbehave terribly, and you're on the social scoring, and you put something on Facebook that they don't like, they can just turn your account off, and you don't buy or sell. And I mean, you don't buy or sell because you don't have the ability. There's no cash. That scares the heck out of me because exactly what you said. I've had people say to me, well, I'll tell you what, I got 2 cows, a pig, and I got 40 acres. And I can my own stuff and grow a garden, I can survive. And I say, no, you can't, because you have no mechanism to pay your property tax. And when you don't pay your property tax, they'll take it away from you. And I ran a bill 4 years ago and it passed, but it hasn't been instituted in all the clerk's offices yet or trustees' offices. But it it provided a mechanism for people to be able to pay their property tax forward, anticipating that lean years might be down the road. I don't want to lose my property, so I can pay. They'd have to run an escrow account for you, where you if you wanted to walk in and deposit $10,000 in your property tax escrow at your county's trustee's office, you can do that. And then the next year or 5 years from now, if you don't have the money to pay your property tax, they take it out of your escrow account. So I ran that bill and it passed to try and give people an avenue to hold on to their property as long as possible. But you go to a central bank digital currency and your liberty's gone. I mean, we're done. You're just done. That's why I ran another bill, worked on this for a long time, to establish this Tennessee State Depository, gold depository, coupled up with the Tennessee Mint, where we not only have a place to store gold, but and silver, any other precious metal, but we also have the ability to mint silver and gold coins. And I think that's really, really important.
I agree.
Because the central bank digital currency, like I said, when you get there, your liberty's gone. Which brings up a whole nother deal we're talking about, because we are fast becoming a surveillance country where government follows you. And I'm working on a bill for this session that's going to try to rein in some of these license plate readers that cities are going to now, that don't just read a license plate and alert central dispatch if a stolen car just went by. It does way more than that. You got license plate readers now that are listening posts. They listen to conversations. They scan and read every license plate that goes by, and it goes in a database and it's shared. And I'm working on a bill right now to try to rein that in. But like I said, bad thing about it, Alexander, this stuff's coming in from 360 degrees.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I think there's definitely some big issues, and I think that's great that you're fighting against that, because this government surveillance track state eventually is going to just turn us into an outdoor prison. So I think that's definitely a big problem. So I was wanting to let the audience know if you're going to be running for higher office.
Oh no! I think that, like I said, state government to me is the only solution. The federal government, I have no confidence in them at all. If we're talking about the preservation of liberty and sovereignty and property, then the federal government has no answers. In fact, they can end up hurting you. I don't look to them for any solutions to preserve those things. I think it has to come from the states. So I think state government is where the action needs to be, and that's where I think the fight ought to be.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's definitely true. Well, I'd just like to thank you for coming on the show. We really appreciate you trying to help the people with all these great bills that you've done and some of the bills that you're going to be doing in the future. I think it's great that you've been doing this, and I'd just like to thank you and definitely would like to have you on the show again.
Well, thank you very much, Alexander. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. I hope you all have a great day, everyone.